Hello, and welcome to your next lesson. In the last video, we discussed options to automatically update your pivot table. We started a draft using NBA stats. Today, we will continue on with our table, and we will also look at our designing options. This speaks to the look and feel of your pivot table. We will review the pivot table styles as well as our show and hide options. Please open the Pivot worksheet and go to the NBA Pivot spreadsheet to follow along in this lesson. Okay, so here we are on our spreadsheet, and as you can see, we did not get very far on creating this pivot table. I think I would like to start from scratch. Let's go ahead and select our pivot table. And as we do that, you can see the Pivot Table Design Analyze tab open. Let's go ahead and click it. Now you will see under Actions, we have the option to clear, select, or move pivot table. Let's go ahead and get the drop down for clear. Let's just go ahead and say clear all. And this way we can go ahead and start from scratch. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at our data source and confirm that we are still pulling from the NBA Stats tab. So let's get the drop down for Pivot Table Analyze. Let's go change data source. Let's click change data source drop down. And as you can see, it says NBA table. So this is confirming that it's pulling from the table that we created in our last video. Okay, so let's go ahead and cancel. All right, now that we are back on our pivot table worksheet, let's go ahead and get started. Now, first of all, let's make sure that our fields are visible. Let's go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and you want to go ahead and click Show Field List if yours is not visible. So as we do this, I'm going to go ahead. The first thing I want to do is add teams, and I also want to add players. Okay, so now this is giving us a breakdown of our teams by the individual players. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and pull in some stats. First, let's go ahead and get the points per game. And we're going to go ahead and place that in the values section. Next, let's get the 2 points per game. And let's also add 3 points per game. And as you can see, as we add each individual one, it not only gives you a breakdown of the per player, but it also gives you a subtotal of the team. Okay, so let's continue on. Let's do the free throws. Okay, so now we have points per game. We have 2 points, 3 points, and free throws for each player, and as an overall score for the individual team. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add the average score for each player for each category. I'm going to select 2-point average, 3-point average, and also the free throw average. Okay, so now that we have our layout, let's talk about some of our functional options. Now, if you only want to see an individual team, we can go ahead and set a filter for the team. Let's drag teams to filters. Then let's go ahead and get the drop down and let's select Boston, for instance, and say OK. So now your table only reflects Boston. Let's get the drop down again and let's go ahead and select Detroit and say OK. So here's a great way where you can look at the individual teams just one-on-one, where you don't have to see it as a full expanded list. You can also collapse the list if you choose to. So let's go ahead and drag teams back to rows, and let's take a look at how we can collapse all the fields. Okay, so now you can collapse the fields individually, or you can collapse them all. Let's go ahead and select Atlanta. Let's do a right click, and as you look at the options for collapse, you will see a field that says collapse or expand, but if you look further down, you'll see the option to collapse teams. So let's go ahead and say collapse to teams. Okay, so that collapsed the Atlanta. Now let's go ahead and right click again. And this time we're going to say collapse entire fill. So now as you look at your pivot table, everything is collapsed. You do not have any filters on, but you can still look at these individually by simply expanding and collapsing the individual tables. So next I would like to take a look at some of our designing options. Let's go ahead into Pivot Table Analyze. Now the first thing I would like to point out is the Show Hide selection right at the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and select Fill List. As you can see, this button removes and adds your fill list. Okay, now let's go ahead and select Buttons. Now I want you to look at your team section as I push this button. And as you can see, it adds and removes. So let's go ahead and see what happens when I remove this button. How do I expand my list then? You just simply click it and it'll still expand, just as if the button was available. Okay, let's put the buttons back and let's look at the fill headers. Again, as I select and unselect, it just removes the fill header. Okay, so let's take a look at our pivot table styles and then we'll wrap up the lesson. Let's go ahead and select Design tab and let's look at the pivot table styles. Okay, let's go ahead and get our drop down. I think I'm going to go ahead and select the orange. Feel free to grab the one that you like the best. Let's go ahead and select the banded rows. And as you can see, it adds color in between each row. Let's do the same for the banded columns. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Let's remove the row headers. And as you can see, it's no longer bold. Now let's do the same for the column headers. And as you can see, it's no longer bold. So I'm going to put the row headers and the column headers back. I'm going to leave the banded rows, but I'm going to deselect the banded columns. Okay, so now I'm pleased with the way that my table looks, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the lesson. In the next video, we'll look at updating our labels and formatting our numbers, so please be sure to join us. And with that being said, I hope you found this information helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Congratulations on completing another video and on your commitment to learning this program. I hope that you are getting the most out of our level up lessons, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.